Well, the first thing I wanted to chat with you about, actually, if we were going to get on the phone, was our shared love for John Wooden,
Oh
because
yeah.
I haven't met too many other people on Farcaster that have talked about Coach Wooden, and as a professionally, like I'm not a basketball player, and I played casually when I was a kid, like most American kids do, but I grew up watching and being a fan of UCLA basketball and football.
Mm.
But basketball in particular, I have a memory of like going to a UCLA game and watching Jason Capono play. I have another memory of going to a game, and I don't know to what extent this is like a real memory or not, but like my dad taking me up and going, "Hey, look, it's Coach in the stands," and he was well retired by this point. But seeing Coach Wooden, like hearing stories of him, and the nicknames and stuff like that. Apparently, he didn't really like the nickname the Wizard of Westwood, but I have a lot of memories of Coach Wooden being like almost a mythical figure early in life. And then I read his books later on, about the Pyramid of Success, and his focus on effort as a type of self-satisfaction, and that self-satisfaction with your own effort as being success in itself. And I think those are all really formative beliefs for me. But yeah, I was curious as to where your relationship with Coach Wooden came, and just like where that comes from.
Yeah, it's I'm glad to start here. It's interesting. We do have this sort of like shared affinity for Coach Wooden. I didn't have any, childhood rooting for UCLA or anything like that, any reason to like UCLA or to like him. And it's something that I was probably aware of him as a kid, just being pretty into sports and basketball and especially college basketball. I grew up a big Syracuse basketball fan, so they
Mhm.
won the championship in 2003, uh, which was sort
Yep.
of like part of my, being a kid really into sports phase, which was a lot of years, but that was like right in sort of the thick of things, and so loved that. That was like Carmelo Anthony as a freshman, Jerry McNamara as a freshman, Hakeem Warwick, some other
Hmm.
guys. I think those are probably the only. Well, McNamara never made the NBA, I guess, but those were like the big three at the time. And so, always been a big basketball fan, and as a result, like I've definitely had respect for certain coaches as well as athletes, but coaches as well. And I guess I can't really recall or remember when I started to get into Wooden, but I know I guess it was my dad had a book, one of his books, maybe Pyramid of Success or something, that was like sort of on our. Actually, I think it was Wooden on Leadership, which
Hmm.
remains my favorite. Um, it's like Steve Jameson wrote it with
Yeah.
him. Steve Jameson also wrote The Score Takes Care of Itself. About
Bill Walsh. Yeah.
Bill Walsh, the
Yep.
football coach, which is also an excellent book. More people know that book,
Yeah.
but the Wooden one was amazing, and I
Mhm.
personally probably prefer it. But they're both great. And so that book was like sort of on our family bookshelf before I knew who Wooden was, or before I knew anything really, probably. And so it
Mhm.
was sort of like passively in the background, and I must have picked it up at some point. That might have been like sort of my introduction to like actually reading books on Wooden, and I've since read a few. In
Mhm.
parallel to all this, I started coaching basketball at the high school level, the junior varsity team, 2 winters ago, and then did it this past winter for the second winter, and had an awesome experience with that. So that also sort of like re-immersed me in wanting to read all of these books by basketball coaches. But before I was doing it for the purpose of coaching basketball, I just found, especially Wooden, to have hugely valuable perspective on just like sort of how to live and like how to be
Mhm.
a good person and a good man and a good businessman, even or like organizational person. Anything like basically operating in any group of people in a way that is sort of good and productive and effective and admirable and high integrity and all of these things. Um, so I love his pyramid of success. I love his definition of success, as you sort of alluded
Mhm.
to, something along the lines of like success is sort of the peace of mind that comes with knowing that you have done everything like to the best of your abilities or something along those lines. Basically, like by
Hmm.
giving the best effort that you can, like regardless of the results, that is success because there's no regrets. It's total peace of mind because you gave it your all, and that's I think it's the best definition of success. The way that he worded it exactly, I probably should know it exactly, but it's sort of like the gist of it stays in my mind, and it's probably the single best definition of success that I personally have heard.
Hmm.
Success being like a fairly hard thing to define. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I've learned a lot from him over the years. My personal favorite Wooden story is from one of these books around. Um, he was at I forget what school he was at prior to UCLA, but like I don't know, you might remember. It was like
Yeah. It's
a
escaping me.
less
Yeah.
what was that?
It's escaping me.
Yeah, it was
What was
like
he at?
Indiana something, I think, like not like a
Yeah.
known
Yeah.
school, like a very like junior school or whatever. And he's there, and he is getting offers to coach, like legit college basketball teams finally. And
Hmm.
he's got offers from I think it was Minnesota and UCLA, and like UCLA was like totally out of left field, whereas Minnesota was like where maybe he was a high school coach this time. I can't quite remember, but
Yeah.
Minnesota was where like a lot of his either current players or former players when he was coaching high school or whatever, like people, he was familiar with the region, and so
Hmm.
like he was very familiar and comfortable with Minnesota. He loved the idea of going to Minnesota. Like he was basically all set on it. His family was stoked about it. But one of like an old friend of his, I guess, or something, like lined up an interview for him at UCLA, and he was like, "Well, I might as well go out for a visit and check it out." And sure enough, he went, and he didn't like it nearly as much as Minnesota. Like the facilities weren't as nice, really far away from home. Like his kids would have had to have like this big adjustment. His
Hmm.
wife would have had to have this big adjustment. He himself would have had this big adjustment. He had no basketball network out there, unlike in Minnesota. So it didn't make sense basically for any reason, and he didn't prefer it. But Minnesota was like sort of giving him a tough time around. They wanted him to keep the current head coach, who he would have been replacing, on his staff, like as an assistant coach. And
Hmm.
he didn't want to do that. I'm sure, like, I don't think he had anything against the guy necessarily. It's just sort of like that's like a weird dynamic that you don't really want, like having the prior head coach is like your assistant. He wanted to like sort of start fresh or whatever. So he's like, that's not going to happen. So like, let me know if you're cool, if you'll make me an offer with that in mind. But like, there's no situation in which like I'm going to come coach here and keep the head coach as my assistant. Like that doesn't make any sense. And they're like, okay, we'll get back to you by whatever it was, 7 p.m. on Thursday. I'm making up a date and
Sure.
time. And so he goes back. UCLA is calling him and saying like, hey, Coach Wooden, have you made a decision? Have you made a decision? Whatever. And he's like, finally, he gets back to them. He says, all right, guys, look, I'm going to be transparent here. Like, my first choice is Minnesota, but I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to get an offer there. There's like been some, a little bit of issues with some of the details. So I'm waiting to hear back from them. They're going to get back to me by 8 p.m. Thursday at the latest. So if I don't hear back from them by then, or, I hear back from them and there's no offer, I'll give you a call to accept the offer to coach men's basketball at UCLA. And so like, time goes by, weeks flying by. He's not hearing from Minnesota. Like Wednesday night into Thursday, there's this like massive blizzard, and like all the power lines are down. I guess the blizzard's in Minnesota, maybe, or where he lives, or somewhere in between, or whatever, maybe both. And so there's this huge blizzard. Like trees are down, power's out, whatever. And maybe I think it was in Minnesota, probably not where he lived, because I don't think he like sort of knew about it. And
Yeah.
so he never gets a call from Minnesota. And 8 p.m. sharp on Thursday or whatever, he calls UCLA and says, I never heard from Minnesota. I'll accept the offer to be your new coach. Like, thank you and excited to start or whatever.
Yeah.
And he hears back from Minnesota. I don't know if it's like hours later or the next day. And Minnesota says, Coach Wooden, we're trying to reach you. So sorry, there's been a blizzard. The phone lines were down. We couldn't get a hold of you. And, this was like his strong preference to coach there. And he
Hmm.
says, thanks for calling, guys. Like, I'm sorry, I already gave my word to UCLA. And I love the story for like two reasons. And thanks for, sitting through the longer telling of it. But I'll just say like the two reasons I love it, and then I'll kick it to you. But at least two reasons I love it. One is that it's a pretty cool like sort of demonstration of like the butterfly effect. Like had there never been a storm, like Minnesota would have made the call, and Coach Wooden would have been there, and UCLA wouldn't have all the rings, and who knows how Coach Wooden would have even done there if Minnesota basketball would have been to UCLA, or like maybe it wasn't a good fit and nothing would have really like panned out the same, or like who knows where Bill Walton or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would have played, and like what would have happened with them, like all these crazy things that would have changed just because basically a blizzard hit Minnesota and whatever that year was.
Yeah.
I always love stuff like that. And then the second thing is like one of Wooden's huge things is, like being a man of your word. And like that to me is like probably the best example that I've heard from his story of sticking to that and not just, talking the talk about being a man of your word, but actually being a man of your word when, there's major consequences completely, sort of like picking up your life and your family's life and moving somewhere else. And like he could have just said like, oh, hey, UCLA, like, sorry, Minnesota, they actually were trying to call me, but they couldn't get to me because of the blizzard. And that is my top choice. So I'm sorry. Like, I know I said 8 hours ago I'd coach, but hopefully nothing has been put into motion. And I'd actually love to go and prefer to go coach at Minnesota. Like, I'm sorry and whatever. And like, that wouldn't have been like that unreasonable. But like the second that he said to UCLA, I'll call you at 8 if I don't hear from them. And then he called them like he said he would and said that he would go there. And then Minnesota like got back to him and were like, we intended to give you the offer. And he's like, sorry, I already gave my word to UCLA. I just think that's so cool. Like I hope, sometimes these stories get a little bit like mythological when they
Hmm.
get passed down. I hope that story's like 100% real. Cause I just love like that's, had that not happened, he wouldn't have even been at UCLA. So
Yeah.
that is a big brain dump on Wooden from my end, but I'm curious what you think of all that.
I adore the story as well. I think the kind of integrity that he demonstrated is, I don't know how common it was during his day, but it's certainly not that common nowadays. And I like to think of myself as someone who at least attempts to behave with a lot of integrity. But Wooden, for me, and it sounds like for you as well, is very much like a North Star of like what direction to look at and keep pursuing as far as integrity is concerned. I think that story is a great demonstration of such a quality.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the North Star. I'm pretty sure we had some back and forth where you were like, you had read a book on Wooden that was like a little less charitable and maybe was sort of critical of certain things. I think
Yeah.
like Steve Jobs is a similar thing for me. I mean, obviously they're extremely different, but like
Hmm.
um, I sort of choose to take the negative stuff about Steve Jobs a little bit of a grain of salt because I
Yep.
really admire a lot of the positive like
Hmm.
sort of characteristics and things about him. And like I like that you use the term North Star because North Star, like on the one hand, it's like sort of where you're guiding yourself, like what you're looking towards as like sort of the ultimate best, like, and you're sort of striving for that, but like you might not actually, you're not expecting to like sort of actually quite get there. And
Yeah.
I think it's a good sort of word for people like these because like they might not even be sort of like real people, so to speak.
Hmm.
Obviously they're real, but like your perception of them or the way that they're written about in books or write about themselves, or what you sort of gather from like the best highlights of clips of their life and whatnot, like these maybe are not sort of like when you combine them true pictures of like real people with all of their flaws and whatnot. And so I think there's like sort of one view that could say like to aspire to be like these people is like not reasonable, and you might sort of like feel unnecessarily bad for falling short of these like unrealistic expectations of these ideas
Yeah.
of people that were above and beyond what they even actually were. But
Hmm.
I sort of take the other view that like I like having sort of like unattainable role models, North Stars, so to speak, where like even if they weren't all that they're made out to be, like it's good to believe that there are and were people like that, because then you can just sort of like keep striving to, you know, be more like that sort of idealistic view of what you think you can be like.
Yeah.
You know, take borrowing from aspects and characteristics of what these people were like. So Wooden is definitely one of those guys for me.
Yep.
Steve Jobs, like I mentioned, in a very different way, is also one of those guys. And I don't know how many I have really. I've never like sort of listed them out, but those guys are like right up towards the top. And yeah, with Wooden, it's definitely much more about just how to be a great person than how to be a great basketball coach. And his books are like not at all X's and O's or anything. Like it's all just applicable to life. And there's actually another coach who I sort of added to that. Like these guys are my top two. It's actually a guy who his name's Morgan Wooten. It's funny
Okay.
that his name is so similar to Wooden. He's the winningest basketball coach at the high school level of all time.
Okay.
Um, and him and Wooden were friendly, and Wooden had like a, you know, review of one of his books, or like he's quoted as saying like some people say Morgan Wooten is the best high school basketball coach of all time. Uh, he said, you know, in my opinion, he's the best basketball coach at any level of all time, which is like, you know, obviously a huge endorsement coming from Wooden. And so like those two guys were sort of my models as basketball coaches, and in a way as just as men. And Wooten has great books as well, but his are much more. He's got ones that are general, but he's also got ones on like the logistics of coaching high school basketball, which was like basically my Bible for these last two seasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think coaches just in general are, for me at least, I don't know if it's just my personal preference, but they're just amazing people to learn from. They're leaders of
Mhm.
men. And whether it's a sports team or a company or anything in between, like learning from great leaders of men is, I think, a great sort of category of people to learn from.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I feel like we're on the same page. Um, I think, like on a very macro, almost poetic level, I think it's very important and also kind of sad that society doesn't have so many heroes like John Wooden is, or even role models if we don't want to use the word hero.
Right.
But like John Wooden is to us, where you can look at this person's qualities and really want to strive to have it, and like these are good qualities that we're trying to strive for. And it seems like figures like this are, I don't know, maybe it's a simply nostalgia for the past. But it seems like figures like this are a little bit less common nowadays, especially when everybody is made human so easily via social media.
Yeah.
And yeah, I appreciate having Wooden as such a figure for me, even after reading his more, I don't know, comprehensive biography. I still came away going, yeah, like he's human, but damn, he lived an incredible life.
Yeah.
And
And to his own
yeah.
point, it's, you know, it's not about being perfect, but it's about the effort. And,
Mhm.
you know, I'm sure these guys fell short some of the time, but with his North Star being like success is, you know, the peace of mind and knowing that you've given it your best. Like, I don't think he was bullshitting that part, you know, like
No,
you know, he might not have,
absolutely not.
like very few people can do that all of the time, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like he tried very hard.
I agree. I agree. And yeah, to your point about coaches, look, and this perhaps is a good time to go back in time a little bit. My high school cross country coach in particular is like among the most impactful people on my life in my life. I
Mm,
think that I became a teacher later on. For a while, I was a teacher for, I don't know, let's just say 8 years or something like that. And I feel like a lot of my teaching style kind of evolved out of how he coached. And I just like I see bits and pieces of him in how I live my life and how I go about my everyday and how I interact with my son now and so on and so forth. And so I mean, uh, coaches for me, I think you get to interact with young people in a different context than the classroom, and I think that that different context is really profound on their trajectory because it allows for, I don't know, in some ways more real lessons than the ones that you can get just in an academic setting. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of the importance of coaches, or a huge believer in the importance of coaches, and also my own personal experience doing cross country when I was younger, and taking a lot of my coach's personality and style and so on and so forth, and having it be part of who I became as an adult. It's a big part of my childhood and how I grew up.
Yeah, I think to your point, I remember I can't remember actually if it was Wooden or Wooten. I get the less like they're very similar in their philosophies as well. So I like have a tough time remembering who said what. But one of them, I remember a chapter in one of their books was called I think it was "Call Yourself a Teacher,"
Yep.
um, and both of them, I believe, taught as well. I think Wooden was, I think, an English teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and then
That's right.
Wooten was a history teacher, and um, beyond the classroom, though, like they're talking, call yourself a teacher about themselves and their role as a coach, and like you said, I think they both viewed coaching as teaching, and not just not really at all, not even primarily teaching basketball, but just sort of like teaching, about the important things in life, with the classroom being the basketball court, and the sort of topical subject being basketball, but
Mm-hmm.
really like using that all as a setting and context within which to teach about the important things in life, and values, and how to you know give an effort, all these things that we're sort of talking about, these things that stick with you, and I think it's funny you mentioned your high school cross country coach, because that was really like when I think about why I wanted to try coaching high school basketball, and what I have found out like that I love about it, like it's really that it's being able to be sort of a teacher, and somewhat of a role model, hopefully, as a coach. And basketball is sort of like the arena in which you can do it, but it's not a whole lot more than that. Um,
Yeah.
and you can just have an impact. Like I think there's something pretty special about like those high school years
Yep.
where you're old enough to like be a real person, and start to, not like, you're obviously not an adult at that point, but like you're starting to like sort of form perspectives that will probably stick with you for life, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you're old enough for all of that, not to be like super childish, and then um, but you're young enough to be like very impressionable, and like you still sort of have that like sort of ignorance of a kid that I think
Mm-hmm.
is like amazing, of you know
Yeah.
you can sort of have these unrealistic ambitions, and be a bit more impractical, and like the idea of, for example, like giving 100% effort all of the time seems
Mm-hmm.
like more doable, like, and if you can sort of just sort of build yourself with that, uh that ambition, like, and start at that age, like that
Yeah.
can really sustain, and persist, I think. Whereas like
Mm-hmm.
later, if you've already sort of wrote it in and started just like sort of going through the motions of life, it's going to be hard to sort of like flip a switch of like, I'm just going to give more effort like overall. And so I don't know, there's something about those years that I think even like more so than college. um I think at college you start to, there's like sort of some different elements that come into play. Also, you're like living on your own at college, um partying, whatever else, and think you sort of know stuff in a lot of ways at that point. And like obviously you can have an impact, like Coach Wooden certainly did, but I
Mhm.
think high school is, for me personally, like I look back at my high school basketball coach similarly to how you do um, with your high school cross country coach. And I don't even exactly like, I would have a hard time communicating like the exact things that I learned from that experience or like tangible takeaways, but I just know that like the experience of playing high school basketball was very important for me.
Mhm.
And that experience is to a large degree, not totally, but to a large degree, sort of determined by the coach. So anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
it's great that people have like when people can sort of have these influences in or around that high school time. I think it's great, and through sports is a great way to get that. And obviously, teachers can do it as well in the classroom, but there's something about like being outside the classroom. It's almost like because you think like because you like when you're in the classroom, you know you're supposed to be learning, and so like it's there's nothing like sort of sneaky about it. But when you're like on this, on the sports field, on the court, whatever, you're not like expecting that you're going to have like all of these lessons thrown upon you. And so they can just sort of like get ingrained a little bit more organically. And they don't feel like sort of as forced. And you're doing something that you like or love to do.
Hmm.
And so it just like all of these ingredients and more, I'm sure, just sort of add up into like sort of a great environment for learning.
Yeah, and you're also put into positions where you're a leader yourself, right? As an athlete, it's much more difficult, I think, in the classroom to be a leader of your peers on a regular basis. But like on a basketball court, you see everybody takes that role at some point, even in micro moments, and certainly even in track or cross country or something like that. You're going to have your time where maybe during the middle of a race, you need to step it up with your teammates, or you're leading practice, or you're leading stretches, or something like that. So you have these micro moments where you get to be a leader and like try on your coaching persona and see how it works, your teaching persona, or your role model persona, or whatever it might be. I think there are so many opportunities for that in these contexts. Yeah, I mean, it was huge for me. And then you get faced with like big moments of loss where you work really hard for something and it doesn't turn out the way you want. You also get moments where you work really hard for something and you unexpectedly break through in a non-linear kind of way. Like
Mm,
I feel like growth, when you imagine it as a kid, is like kind of a linear process, like math class. Like you learn something and then you learn something else and you learn something else, and like they kind of stack on each other, and you just kind of keep going. At least my experience running was completely non-linear. Like I was like bad, 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 and then I was a little bit better, and then all of a sudden I won a race,
mm,
like a varsity league championship or something like that. And so I was like a city champion. I was like, what just happened? All of that work that I put in before, all of a sudden just happened. It just like came out of me, and I was like, what is this? And and so you get that like cognitive, this kind of experiential learning from having growth that's nonlinear, and that was huge. I remember another kind of separate thing is I remember losing a race and being really angry and like I don't know, like cursing afterwards, and like coach pulled me over and he was like, "That's not okay." And I was like, "Okay, I'm sorry." And it's like, "I want you to apologize to the team tomorrow when we wrap up." And so I did. And that was a lesson, like how to lose with grace, how to win with grace, and
mm.
so on and so forth. Because you get put in these situations where like you're not going to find that in the classroom for the most part. Maybe you miss a question on a test, but it's just not that kind of intensity that you'll get playing sports. And you also don't have the same kind of relationship with your teachers that you have with your coaches in general. There are exceptions, of course, but yeah, I'm a huge fan of this kind of whole domain for getting to grow up. I'm glad that I had those experiences, and they were really formative for me.
Yeah, those examples I think are great and like resonate, pretty strongly. Another one I would sort of add that occurred to me as you're saying all of this is um, you don't really get to do team stuff generally speaking as much in the classroom.
Mm.
It's kind of an individual sport, if you will, like school. And
Yeah.
obviously, you'll get on a team project here and there or whatever, but it's like, you know, it's a single project team. It's like you're not really competing as much. Like it's very different. It's sort of like artificial team, I would say.
Yeah.
And there's other ways to get this team element, obviously, other than sports. You could have, I don't know, like a debate team or whatever else,
Mhm.
do a play or whatever else there is. But like I think classroom is not really like inherently a team thing. And
Mm.
yeah, I know like one to your point, like winning with grace, losing, being a good sport, both of these things are things that I've definitely like sort of worked on with our team. Like you realize as a coach that like the most important thing to do when you're up 30 with 2 minutes to go in the game is to communicate to the bench that like, with my team especially, like we didn't win in blowout fashion very often. And
Mhm.
so like when we did, it's like you go to the bench and, make sure that we celebrate and like support your teammates, but not over the top, like act like you've been here before. And, remember we've been on the other side of this and like all of those sorts of things. And there's just not really opportunities for that in the classroom, like you said. I'm curious, it's interesting you mentioned like sort of this linear, non-linear growth experience. I don't, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I don't know that I ever had that in a sports context personally. I've experienced
Mhm.
that more broadly, like in life, more so in career. I don't, I think to your
Mhm.
point, doesn't really happen so much in school.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really experience it in class. I didn't really experience it. I don't think personally in sports. But I have since experienced it fortunately in life. And it's been a very important sort of, thing to learn that growth doesn't have to be linear. And in
Mhm.
fact, linear growth may not be sort of like the most effective form long term. It might be better to sort of take big steps and then, it's hard to find that next big step, but eventually you will. And like rather than the, one foot after the other linear growth. But I'm curious with like of all sports, cross country seems like one that actually lends itself towards linear growth. Like you sort of keep conditioning, keep working, and like your time goes down, increment by increment. So I'm curious if you have any memory of what that might have been like to like break through or any idea as to how that happened. Like the only thing I could really, if I were to sort of speculate on how that might have happened, I would sort of think that it had to be like a mental unlock because the physical progression of like speed and
Mhm.
like conditioning and heart rate and all of these things would seem to be like would seem to be naturally linear. But if you have like
Yeah.
sort of a mental unlock and suddenly, for example, you figure out how you can give like sort of a not you figure out that what you thought was like a full effort was only 60% and you can actually give it 85 for like the extent of a
Yeah.
full race, then like that's a bit, that'll change a lot. So I'm curious if you have any memory of anything related to that
Yeah.
like actual step up that you experienced.
Yeah. I mean, if I'll just give the long story and you can you can shorten it as you like.
No, I love the
I
long
went
story.
to I went to one school when I was a freshman, and I was there for about 3 months. And my buddy during the summer before we started high school had invited me to cross country practice, and he was already on the team at the school that we were both going to go to. And I didn't have any running shoes, and so he lent me. I don't know if you remember this brand. I don't even know if they're around anymore. Like these LA Gear shoes,
Oh
and
yeah.
like LA Gear is like the cheapest pair of shoes that you can buy that still looks like running shoes. They're like I think they were probably like $20 per pair. We bought them at Big Five or whatever. He bought them at Big Five, and so he lent me his. I think he gave me like a second pair of his like LA Gear shoes, and so I showed up to practice, and the seniors on the team, the varsity squad, was like, "Oh, Chris brought this other guy," and my friend, as I found out, was already really fast. And even though he was an incoming freshman, he was like training with the varsity team and stuff like that. So
Right.
I tried to do the same workout he was doing, and it just destroyed me. Of course, I was like a more normal freshman than he was, and so I joined this team, and I was JV, and I was like a okay, somewhat mediocre JV. I also had like a cough that year, and it was kind of awkward. And like I did okay, and I ended up transferring schools. And I don't know what the law where you are is, or like the sports law. but I couldn't join the varsity squad my sophomore year at my new school because I had run for JV or varsity at my old school, and like they didn't want
Mm.
people trying to like snipe kids and get them to transfer from one school to another just to play sports, and so there are a bunch of rules about this. And so I had gotten a little bit faster, and like I was good enough to be like a low level varsity runner by my sophomore year. I did okay in track, and like I think I made league finals, but I got last place in the mile or something like that, and so I was a little bit better than I was, and I had some kind of linear progression, and it just like kept working at it, and so we actually appealed the decision. Like we put in a petition to let me run varsity, so that I could be on the varsity squad my sophomore year, and CIF, which is like the governing body of sports in California, said no, sorry, and so we appealed it. And this is already cross country season was already going on, and I would run JV races and I would win. But like I was running, what was my cross country times during JV? I would probably run like a 19:30 or something like that. And like it was enough to win a JV race, but nothing to write home about.
How far is
Varsity
that? 1930?
19:30, I think it was 3 miles at the time.
Three
So it's
miles or
like a
maybe like a 5K or something.
yeah, I don't think it was 5K when we were doing it. I think it may be 5K in some areas now, but I think
Three
it was three
flat.
miles. Yeah, I think it
Makes
was three
sense.
flat. And
And so you're allowed to run JV at this point. You're
I'm
like
allowed to
after
run JV,
transferring, you're
but I
just not
can't.
allowed to do
Yeah,
varsity.
I'm not
Okay.
allowed to do varsity because that's where things start to really matter. So I'm not allowed to
Right.
do varsity. They're not going to prevent me from doing sports, but I can't do varsity. And so first race I run, I think the first league meet I run JV and I win. And it's like there's not that much competition. I'm obviously a varsity runner, but I'm running JV. And I think my appeal comes back, and they're going to allow me to run varsity my during the second league meet. And so I run varsity, and I think I got like, let's just say I got like 10th place or something like that in the league, which was really good. Because there I don't know, each team has 7 varsity runners, I think, and there are however many teams, let's say like 6. So like 10th out of a pool of like 50 or 60 or 70 runners is
Mm.
like just fine. It's like a great placing, and everybody's like, "What? Like that kid sucked last year. How is he so good?"
Huh.
And they're like, maybe we did. My old school had actually really supported my case. The athletic director went out of his way to help me write the appeal and so on and so forth. So all the schools were working together. Everybody was super cool. My old coach helped. My new coach was obviously helping, and everybody was really good to me. But I had a
Which was
little
the
bit of a
coach that you mentioned earlier, the new or the old?
the new
Okay.
coach that I ran for the next 3 years. I love
Okay.
my old coach as well. We have a great relationship still. But I certainly spent a lot more time running for the second coach. And so I finally got approved to run varsity, and I did pretty well in the second race. But like, there were some seniors on my team that were supposed to win league this year, and like they had a good chance at it. And my old school and my friend who originally invited me were also they were like top three. They had like 2 runners in the top three or something like that, and then the third runner was the senior from my school who was supposed to win. And we would train together every day, of course, at practice. And practice basically went the same way. As like we would go running together, and like we would all speed up at the end. And I'd come in, I don't know, maybe like fifth on my team or fourth on my team or whatever. Um, so one of the things that happened that year, it was our year to host league finals, and this meant that we got to design our own course, and I think it was going to be held at our school. So what our coach had us do, and this was actually ingenious, is he had us run our course all the time. Like we would run our 3 mile course at our school that he had designed, like just several times a week. And when league finals came around, I had already run this course dozens of times. I don't know if I ran it 100 times, but certainly dozens of times. And so, like league finals happens, and we take off, and I don't think this has ever happened to me since. I won other races, but this hasn't happened to me since. But my mind just turned off. Like it was completely off. I had run this course dozens of times before, and my mind just turned off. And I ran the course, and I went out a little bit quick. I think I got into first relatively early, and I just turned my mind off, ran the course I had ran dozens of times, came in, and I think I had set a personal record by like a minute or something stupid by the time I came
Wow.
through, and I won the race. And I was like, everybody was shocked. I was shocked. Like second place and third place were shocked. My senior who was supposed to win, and I was a sophomore, was a little bit upset, but also shocked. And it was just like a what just happened moment. And so yeah, it was a mix of a whole bunch of different things. But I think being able to turn my mind off and run that race was, and of course my fitness was inside of me, right? Like you can't run faster than you are fit. It just doesn't
Right.
work that way. But I had never had the opportunity to get into that kind of mental state and to run the race like that. And so that was a huge breakthrough for me. And it was hard in subsequent cross country seasons. It was hard to get back to that same mental state. I had a lot more success later on with track than I did with cross country. But that particular race was special, and I PR'd by a huge amount. I won the race. I won the league finals. And after you have a taste of what it's like to win something, I feel like it's a lot easier to win again.
Mm.
And I think that was like, I don't know, like a life principle that I got from winning that particular thing. And it was different. Like I had played soccer earlier in life. It's a team sport. And I was okay at soccer, not particularly great, but I always worked really hard. But winning a cross country race, like you are all on your own to an extent. Like it's your body. Like no one. Sometimes your teammates will help you a little bit by like being next to you or encouraging you. But at the end of the day, you have to run your race. And once I had won one race, come track season, like I now know I can win, and that mental unblock made a huge difference. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's my somewhat longer story about the non-linear growth to winning a race.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome story, and I appreciate you telling it. It was probably shorter and definitely better than my telling of the wooden story. So that's good, and yeah, it just sounds like an unbelievable moment, and it's interesting. So that like there was some linear growth basically, and then there was just
Yeah.
this like sort of non-linear step up for that race, and I'm always. It's funny how you describe it. Like the main thing that I'm hearing from you is that your mind just completely shut off. And
Mhm.
this is like something I hear a lot from, like, I think it's just the sort of thing for amazing athletic performances, maybe other performances of certain kinds as well. But
Mhm.
even, people sort of know this, whether they've really thought about it or not. Like the terminology of sports sort of reveals this. Like if you hear, announcers will say, he's playing out of his mind,
Yeah.
or he's absolutely unconscious. Like when guys are
Yeah.
like, going on a streak, and
Yeah.
it's like people don't really think about that much, but that is like all of the best athletic performances people sort of describe that way. I feel like, I blacked out and like stuff like that. And I think it's like the closest thing I can come to describe it is like a sort of like a flow state,
Hmm.
basically.
Yeah.
And you can have like sort of pieces of this, like, I do throughout my day. They're not as dramatic or maybe strong or extreme, but you sort of get into a flow of doing some work or something. And you, like one thing that is sort of like a sign for me that I've been in that state is sort of checking the time and kind of not knowing where it all went, or like being surprised by how much has gone by since I've last been aware of the time.
Hmm.
Um, and like, I think this would be one of the best things to be able to sort of like repeatably turn on. Like you said, like it's been hard to, with, at least in the context of cross country, you were never able to quite get to that experience again of like
Hmm.
the, it sounds like sort
Yeah.
of the uh, extremity with which you were able to just like turn the mind off and just
Yeah.
run this track that you knew exactly how to run.
Hmm.
Um, and had you been thinking during it, you might have been like, whoa, like, I'm in first place and there's two guys on the team expected to finish in front of me. I'm probably going to run out of gas if I keep this pace. So I should like sort of, you
Yeah.
know, fall back to where they're at and then maybe give it a push at the end or something. But like, these are all just these thoughts that are like sort of, self-compromising or whatever. And like, you didn't have any of that. You just probably gave it the absolute best that you could for the entirety of the race without thinking about anything, and like that resulted in just finishing in a time that you probably couldn't have convinced yourself logically was possible had you been thinking about it at all, like sort of during the race. And so I often try to think about routines or habits or anything that I can do to get a much smaller version of that, just in terms of being able to like really lock in to work or focus on
Mhm.
whatever sort of the task at hand might be. And I think a lot of people use shortcuts, such as which I don't think are just like pure shortcuts. I think like a lot of shortcuts, they come with trade-offs. And so like those shortcuts, I think a lot of times are drugs, basically,
Mhm.
where
Yep.
whether it's less significant drugs like caffeine or nicotine, or more significant like Adderall or Vyvanse or whatever
Yep.
combination of things you might want to come up with, energy
Mhm.
drinks, whatever. Um, these things I think can help sort of get into a real zone for a long time. And I don't know what the trade-offs of like, I've had my personal experimentation with, you know, going without caffeine for a while, and then,
Mhm.
trying it in different ways where I have it once a week or twice a week or every day or whatever. And
Right.
I can't say with any confidence as to like what the trade-offs are if something is relatively inconsequential as caffeine.
Mhm.
And I can even say less about like, Adderall or things at those levels. But my gut is generally, and it could be totally wrong, that there is a trade-off, and it may be difficult to perceive, but may not be worthwhile. So I've avoided the latter category um, since college, at least.
Yeah.
Dabble for exams and whatnot. For what it's worth, I think uh, I don't know how much I should be talking about this stuff on air, but it's all legal for what it's worth. Like I had a
Excellent.
prescription for Vyvanse at some point, and I basically got it filled once and never needed to refill it. I just used it here and there over the course of
Mhm.
like a couple of years. I think my junior and senior year for finals, when like the trade off was, you're gonna be able to like study for 1 million hours a day for like the few days this week that you need to, and then like
Yeah.
you're gonna actually like score a lot better on your tests probably as a result of that studying, and then like whatever the trade-offs are, like you're not going to do too much damage in like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
But for what it's worth, I mentioned that because like uh, with the prescription, like I actually think that I have like I would say if if there's a spectrum for ADD, ADHD, whatever, like I'd say
Mhm.
I'm like reasonably far along it towards
Okay.
the diagnosable side. Like I just
Mhm.
am constantly sort of getting distracted by things. Like when I'm driving, like I have a hard time like sort of paying attention, like all these things. But I think in a lot of cases the prescription of a drug for that, like I think a lot of people who are prescribed these things, like there's, and I'm not a doctor or anything obviously, but I think a lot of times there's lifestyle changes that could be made first,
Yep.
where like, oh, you need like an Adderall to sit at the desk for 8 hours a day every day. Like maybe you wouldn't need it to do something that is just more appealing, like for more just like naturally appealing
Mhm.
to humans, basically.
Yep.
Um, so anyway, I sort of digress a lot from these means to the end of a flow state. But I think any way that you can achieve that sort of state without without like sort of drugs or any other sort of like shortcut for things that you want to be in a flow state for.
Mhm.
So like it's just sort of a very interesting category for me because the performance to your example is an extreme one, but the performance like during that sort of mind off just doing the thing time can just be like really amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm basically like I don't drink coffee and I drink green tea every once in a while, but not for performance enhancing means, just because I like the taste of it. But I feel like my mental model for a lot of this stuff is very similar. Funnily enough, I use like a running metaphor for it. We have trainers, right? Like normal heavy running shoes that we do most of our training in, and then you have either spikes or racing flats, depending on the distance and, well, to an extent, your personal preference. And our coach in general had us run most of our races in our trainers, and every once in a while we would get our racing flats or spikes out to run more important races, or when we really wanted to get a feel for speed. But I feel like most of the like personally, I haven't bought racing flats. I actually run a little bit now after taking a long break, and I haven't yet bought my own adult racing flats. And I feel like I'm just not in good enough shape to deserve buying racing flats yet. And some of my
Mm.
friends who are also runners think this is a little bit absurd, but I feel like it's like an icing on it's an icing on the cake, right? Like if I'm training hard and I'm in good shape, then I'm very happy to buy racing flats and like run a fast race. But if I'm just training okay, or like I'm not quite there yet and I see I have so much left to go and like speed is not the problem, it's like endurance and it's time that I'm investing in and it's my general fitness and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't need racing flats. Like I'll be a little bit faster wearing them, sure. But like that's not where the real gains are going to come. And like I have a lot of foundational work that's more important to do first. And I feel like I think about caffeine, or caffeine actually, runners take caffeine to run faster as well. And like I put those in like similar categories where like it's if I'm at the top of my game and I need something else to help, then fine. But until I get there, then it's like unnecessary and probably a little bit harmful in some cases.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, I haven't thought of it quite that way, but like I totally agree with it generally. And like basically the way I think of it is like sort of you want to earn your way like as high as you can, um, like sort of through the struggle and just like the hard work that's necessary. And then, as you start to feel like you've made it through most of that, then you can sort of like pull the lever that's always going to be available to you to get that extra
Yeah,
juice. But to pull
exactly.
that lever like before having done the work is just like, you're giving yourself all the low hanging fruit, and then the only thing you're going to be able to do is like work really hard, and just it seems like sort of a backwards way of doing it,
Yeah,
basically.
and it doesn't benefit the training. It would be another thing if it helped me train better or something like that, but that's not the case for the most part.
Yeah,
And so like I use AI to code all the time, and like I have no problem with that. It doesn't work the same for me because like AI is helping me with the coding and with the process. Now, if I was studying how to do something, or if I was doing like a problem set, then I might try and do it myself first without relying on AI for all of the assistance, or I would use it as a Socratic tutor, not like a write my code for me type of thing. Um,
right.
but like AI helps a ton with my throughput, and so I'm not opposed to using tools that are helpful. In fact, I use tools all the time. But is it like the right thing to do for the stage I'm at? Is a question that I often ask myself when I'm thinking about these performance enhancing tools.
Yeah, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit to two things that I wanted to talk about before our time is out.
Yeah, yeah,
One is, we don't have to spend too much time here if we don't want, but maybe we will. You live in Japan, right?
yep, that's right.
Uh, that's interesting to me. I was fortunate to spend 3 weeks in Japan roughly 5 years ago. Loved it.
Mhm.
I'm curious how you ended up out there. Sounds like you grew up in America, and
Yep,
how you like it generally.
I love Japan. I live in Okinawa, which is, and I've lived in other parts of Japan as well. I live in Okinawa right now, and Okinawa is it's a different flavor of Japan. It's Japan, but it was its own kingdom for several hundred years before. It's kind of like Hawaii is to America, Okinawa is to
Hmm.
Japan. And so it's its own flavor of Japan. And I love it out
Is
here.
it its
It's
own
great.
island or no?
Yeah, it's its own island, its own set of islands, about halfway between mainland Japan and the Philippines, like
Hmm.
an hour away from Taiwan, by airplane. So it's out there. It's not and as such, it has its own distinct culture and things like that. It's definitely more island. It's even more island culture than Japan. If you've been on an island, you kind of get the gist. But yeah, it shares a lot with Hawaii in terms of vibes. The Japan story starts with me as an elementary school student. We had exchange students when I was a kid. I'm the only child, and we had an exchange students. They were like older sisters to me, and I think we had, let's just say, like we had 6 exchange students over a period of 2 years when I was in elementary school.
Mm.
And they were awesome. Like I think one of my exchange students bought me a Japanese copy of Pokemon Yellow for Christmas as a Christmas gift. And this is my first Pokemon game when I was a kid, and I ended up being a huge fan. But they were amazing, and it was really cool. They invited like these 6 families somehow coordinated. This is mind blowing to me. These 6 families somehow coordinated a trip for my mom and I to come visit Japan when I was 11. And we would stay, like the plan was for us to stay a little bit at each of their houses, and like they would like pass us from one home to another, or like someone come pick us up and then we go home, whether we go with them and stay for a few more days. And so I did this 2 week trip when I was 11, and like it was really cool. And I kind of remember it. I see pictures later on and stuff like that, but like I had a little bit of a Japan connection when I was younger. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to go for a 1 month exchange program where I would visit a city in Japan and stay with a host family that had a high school boy who was the same age as me. And then he would come to the States and stay with my family for a month. And so like it was a sister city program, and everyone was high school students. So I went over, stayed for a month, and then he came back and stayed for a month. And I really hit it off with him and with the host family and with Japan in general. And I thought, this is like, I want to be here again. Like 1 month is not enough. Like, get me back here. And so when I left, my homestay family said, hey, if you ever want to come back, you can stay with us again. And we continued emailing, and I was like, well, what if I like leave it to me to be completely oblivious of social, like of just like being nice. I was like, okay, well, you offered, so why don't I see if I can take you up on it? And so I applied for your standard UCs and your University of California universities and stuff like that. And I also applied for a university in Japan. And I didn't speak Japanese at the time, at least not much. But there was one, there were a couple schools, but there was one in Tokyo where you could go even if you didn't speak Japanese, and you could apply with your SATs. And just like you would spend the first year just studying the Japanese language, and then you do the rest of your degree in Japanese. And so I ended up applying for being accepted to that school. And apparently it turns out like this is like a super elite Japanese school. It's kind of like a small liberal arts elite school, and they have a bunch of these in the States, like the one that Steve Jobs went to. And so it was one of those types of schools. And like eventually, like I think after I left, one of the like imperial family members ended up going to the school and stuff like that. I didn't know all of this when I applied for it. I just wanted to go to Japan. And so I got accepted here, decided to decline the other offers that I got from California colleges, and moved to Japan for university. Much to my family's chagrin, to an extent. I think they were happy for me, but also like, what? He's going overseas. And so yeah, I went to school in Japan. And the other part of this story is it wasn't just that I wanted to go to college in Japan, but I had met this. He was like an ex-national silver medalist judo athlete, and he was running his own like chiropractic clinic. And this is a common thing in Japan for ex judo athletes to become chiropractors. I suppose since they like mess up their bones every once in a while, they like know how to do this stuff. And I was like enamored with this idea of like being able to learn from him and stuff like that. And so I went, and for the first few months, I did a little bit of an apprentice with him and learned some of his bone setting ways. And I didn't end up pursuing that path, but like that was what I wrote my entrance application letter to the university. Is like, I want to apprentice with this guy, and I also want to go to your school so I can learn this, and this about how Japan works and like Japanese business and so on and so forth. And so That was like a hugely formative experience when I was 18, moving abroad, going to school in Japan, learning from this gentleman who was teaching me about Japanese bone setting and chiropractic, and also a little bit of philosophy and like way of life type stuff. And yeah, I mean, like I have a billion stories from my time in Japan, but we don't have that much time in this podcast. Long story short, like I met a girl, we ended up getting married. We lived abroad for a while, and then decided when I had a young son to come back. Um, and it's been great so far being back.
And how did you pick where you are currently exactly? Because it sounds like, I don't know if you had been there prior to your, like with your other experiences in Japan, but it sounds like it is, worth sort of like separating out from more
Yeah,
more broadly Japan. It's not like you're moving to the town over, like you're moving to another island. It's like sort of further away with its own characteristics.
yeah, for sure. Okinawa is, I mean, we basically made the choice for our son, and Okinawa is one of the most child friendly places that I've been in the world.
Huh.
Um, People here just really, really like children, and it comes with the standard Japanese like safety and like conveniences and so on and so forth. But people love children. Like if you run into somebody on the street, they'll like smile at my son and like play with him and so on and so forth. Also, a lot of people living in Japan experience some sort of, if you're not from Japan originally, then like you'll notice that you get treated a little bit differently if you're not Japanese. It's still quite a homogenous place, even though there's some heterogeneity inside of it. And
Right.
for whatever reason, like Okinawa like cares a lot less that my son is not completely Japanese and so on and so forth. And like I actually love Japan. I have had very few negative experiences overall, and like I even the other places I lived in Japan, great experiences. But you can see like when you're a little bit different, you often get treated a little bit differently. For me, that's basically okay, and I don't care that much. It doesn't bother me. But a lot of people care. But in Okinawa, like it seems, I think there's a larger foreign population. You have the American bases and stuff like that. And my son just gets treated really well, and we get treated as insiders for the most part. And man, it's really, I think having become a father, I find myself much more focused on how society is to my child than I noticed when before having a child. Like how do people interact with children? Do they like children? Do they not like children? Like, is it a child friendly place? Is it not a child friendly place? And so on and so forth. So this is a really big part of my mind share and how I approach thinking about different places to move.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I'm now really intrigued by Okinawa. We had, that was not one of our stops, as you could probably guess, in a few weeks traveling. We were all, traveling by train and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so now, if I ever go back, I'd like to. It sounds like that's not even a part of a Japanese tour, really. It's like its own little trip, or you're going
Yeah,
from
you could
island to
fly out
island or
here.
something like that.
Yeah, you can fly. I think it's like a 2.5 hour flight from Tokyo or something like that. It's a little ways.
Wow.
But I mean, after you've seen Japan and you understand Japan, you're like, oh, I wonder what else. Like, it's a very cool, distinct flavor where you have the original indigenous culture mixed with Japanese culture, mixed with like post World War II American culture. There's like one of the popular dishes here is taco rice, and actually you can get pretty good Mexican food.
Hmm.
Um, and then you have like some Chinese and Southeast Asian culture that made its way in through the indigenous culture as well. So a really interesting mishmash of cultures that's very different from what you get on mainland Japan.
Yeah, it's super cool. So, lastly, I know we are well over on time, but if you have another moment, I
Yeah,
think it would be great to give people a little taste slash preview of your latest build,
for
which
sure.
I came across a few days ago. It's like a token launcher with a pretty unique mechanism that I haven't seen before. I would assume you
Yeah.
probably came up with it and hadn't seen it elsewhere either. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and we'll give a place for people to go when they're done listening here.
For sure. So most recently, Mark Carey and Mark Carey, Markcarey, on Farcaster launched Stream.fun. And it's a token launcher, but the mechanic is that you can stake any tokens that you buy and get a proportional share of rewards in the token that are streamed directly to your wallet. And streaming means new tokens come every second to your wallet. And so you're like continuously getting paid a little bit more if you stake. And the reason we're doing this, this is not my idea. Certainly, it's existed in. It's built on a protocol called Superfluid, and I think this idea has been in the Superfluid system for a while. But I think post Clanker, it made a lot more sense to try it now than it did in the past. And
Mm.
Clanker did a lot of really cool stuff that made like a Farcaster native token launcher more attractive. And so we borrowed a lot of ideas from Clanker and then did a Superfluid spin on it. And really what we're trying to do is like, what if you're a serious token launcher and you want to have a good launch for your token, like what mechanics increase the likelihood that you have a successful launch? I think when the only thing that you can do with it, this isn't my quote either, but when the only thing you can do with the token is sell it, then a lot of initial launches just look like a pump and dump. You're like buying a token and then holding it, hopefully because it works, but like there's not much to do with most things, even financially. And so, like, how do you add mechanisms that make sense that aren't like a complicated rule set, but that make sense and better align the incentives of people who buy the token as well as people who are launching the token, so that like serious projects and people who care about their having their tokens succeed over the long term have a better chance at making that a reality. Like a token launcher is a kind of a strange thing for me to launch personally. Like I'm not a big trader. And Mark Carey originally like kind of recruited me. He pitched me on the project, and I said, okay, that sounds interesting. But I think for me, being able to align the incentives of the people who are launching serious projects and the people who want to buy the token and want to support is really it's an attractive thing. If you were to launch a token and I wanted to buy into it, like I'm happy to buy, and like how do I buy even more into it? It's by launching, like locking and staking and these other mechanisms that let me as a buyer help you as a launcher. And so that's really what I'm looking at, and ways to incentivize that and make that more of a reality. And we're still throwing a lot of ideas against the wall and seeing what makes sense, but excited to iterate and play and continue launching with it.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting mechanism for sure, and I think like Clanker showed like the form factor of a launcher could be like to tag a bot on Farcaster, which was amazing. But
Mm-hmm.
there's and they chose sort of a subset of what they wanted to do in terms of the mechanics and the fees and whatnot. But like that
Mm-hmm.
whole area beyond the form factor itself is like totally up for innovation, I think, and we've seen a lot of people doing a lot of different things. I'm curious, like with this sort of stream mechanism, like stake and receive the stream, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First of all, how long does like staking, like, what's the process for unstaking? Like, how long are you actually committed?
Yeah.
And then, second of all, when I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like 20% of the total supply goes towards this pool that gets streamed to the people staking.
Yep.
How did you come up or like think about that percentage, and like how would it be different if, just as sort of like a thought experiment that I was sort of curious to think through, like if you were to just completely flip that, where it was like 80% was going to be streamed. I'm curious, like sort of how you landed on this 80-20 and in the direction that you did. So maybe you could speak to that.
I think Mark would be a better party than I am to
Okay.
speak to the why of this, and like you should have him on. He's excellent and an ultra marathon runner and a really like a beast of a developer. It's
Nice.
been awesome working with him. But I think he'd be better to explain the whys of this.
Right.
We have a modular architecture, and so we can change a lot of these mechanics. Obviously, not for tokens that have already been launched, but if we decide to update how we want to approach the mechanics later on, we have the ability to do so relatively easily. And so I think there's going to be a lot of iteration that gets to happen. I hope there's a lot of iteration that gets to happen. As to the current mechanics, there's a 24-hour cooldown timer post staking until you can unstake. And that's like it's kind of like the degen vault lock style thing where like you put some degen in the degen vault, and like I think it's 90 days for them or 3 months or something like that,
Right.
before you can unlock. And similarly, like after you stake, you have to wait 24 hours and then you can unstake. And yeah, you can just leave it in there if you want, and you'll continue to accrue rewards. So you don't have to unstake after 24 hours, but you can. And I think on the
And
website,
that's
I think I have a
modular.
timer. Yeah, and that's modular
That's
as well.
modular as
So
well, so you can
that
change
lock
it.
period is just an initial, experiment.
Makes sense. And yeah, I've actually worked with Mark a little bit on. He's done a couple of base colors collabs with like his Pixel
That's
Nouns
right.
project. So
Hmm.
well aware of Mark's beast characteristic as a coder and as a builder. And I didn't know about the ultra marathon bit though, so it's a good guest rec, and I'll have to hit him up. But anyway,
Absolutely.
appreciate all the time. It's been an awesome conversation about everything from wooden to token launchers, with a little bit of Okinawa in between. So
Beautiful.
um, awesome stuff. Looking forward to sharing it out there. And yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you out on the feed.
Sounds good. See you out on the feed. Take care, Jake. Thanks for having me.
All right, have a good one. Bye bye.